Greetings and good morning. My name is FatalProse, and we are moving through chapter 2 of the book Salvation, Black People and Love by Bell Hooks. We'll be reading through this, without interruption to the end of the chapter. This will be hosted on my YouTube channel. I don't claim any rights to this book. It's just for entertainment purposes only. Um, and then later we'll come back and do a discussion on this as well. Please do check my content out on my TikTok page, FatalProse LLC or FatalProse on TikTok. We'll be engaging in discussion, on these topics. But right now, we're just going to read through chapter 2 of Salvation, Black People in Love by Bell Hooks. This is chapter 2, We Wear the Mask. Okay. Um, in the diaspora, most Black people's relationship to love has been shaped by the trauma of abandonment. Whether we take as the foundation of our psychohistory the African explorers who came to the so-called New World before Columbus, the free individuals who came in small numbers as immigrants, or the large population of Black people who were enslaved and brought here against their will, this is an emotional backdrop full of the drama of union and reunion, of loss and abandonment. It has always struck me as particularly meaningful that the first Africans who came to these shores fellowshiped with the indigenous people they met here, sharing resources and knowledge, but ultimately chose to return home. They valued the culture and connections they had left behind more than anything they found in the New World. In this way, they were no different from the Spanish colonizers who would travel in their wake. They chose to come and they chose to leave. When this history of power, freedom, and choice is juxtaposed against the legacy of powerlessness, enslavement, and absence of choice, a complex emotional backdrop unfolds. For way too long, Black people in this society were taught only that we came to this country as slaves. It has taken years of progressive anti-racist struggle to create enough cultural momentum so that a holistic picture of our history in this nation, a true complete vision of our past, one that is not tainted by racist biases, can emerge. Whatever its flaws and defects, the movie Amistad and all the publicity it received globally reminded the world that all Black people did not come here as slaves. Who we are as African Americans, as Black folks in the diaspora, our cultural destiny has been shaped by both the enslaved and the free. Autobiographies and biographies of enslaved Black people tell a collective story of individual emotionally ravaged by separation from homeland, clan, and family. I'll say that again. Autobiographies and biographies of enslaved Black people tell a collective story of individuals emotionally ravaged by separation from homeland, clan, and family. Naturally, these stories say little about love and tell us more about the nature of human suffering and heartache. In his insightful work, The Art of Loving, Erich Fromm defines love as a fusion of care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility. Drawing upon this work and adding to it, M. Scott Peck extends this definition to include the will to nurture one's own and another's spiritual growth. With this understanding of love's meaning, it is clear that more people than not, slavery made it all but impossible for Black people to love one another. When emotional ties were established between individuals, when children were born to enslaved mothers and fathers, these attachments were often severed. No matter the tenderness of connection, it was often overshadowed by the trauma of abandonment and loss. Slave narratives document the efforts individual Black people made to normalize life in an abnormal circumstance. Despite the dehumanization enacted by the dominant culture of white supremacy, with spiritual resiliency, enslaved Black people worked to create a subculture where bonds of affection could be forged and sustained. Two of the most widely read slave narratives by Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs share detailed memories of the psychological tension generated by the conditions of enslavement. In Jacob's narrative, she tells of a moment when her older brother Willie is torn between family bonds and the demands of enslavement. One day, when his father and his mistress both happened to call him at the same time, he hesitated between the two, being perplexed to know which had the strongest claim upon his obedience. He finally concluded to go to his mistress. Douglas insisted in his narrative that he had never known a mother's love, but he shared at the beginning of his story that his mother had walked miles to hold him as a child, even though she risked brutal punishment. To Douglas, a mother's love was defined by care that was sustained, that could be counted on. In his case, the trauma of separation and abandonment overwhelmed these early memories of loving care. Jacobs was cared for deeply by her grandmother. That care lasted throughout her lifetime. Finally escaping slavery, Jacobs wrote how that faithful, loving old heart would leap for joy if she could look on me and my children now that we were freed. Importantly, Jacobs concluded her narrative with this declaration: Reader, my story ends with freedom, not in the usual way, with marriage. I and my children are now free. We are free from the power of slaveholders, as are the white people of the North. And though that, according to my ideas, is not saying a great deal, it is a vast improvement in my condition. The dream of my life is not yet realized. I do not sit with my children in a home of my own. I still long for a hearthstone of my own, however humble. I wish it for my children's sake far more than my own. Like so many other black folks who made it the transition from slavery to freedom, but who were still compelled by poet Paul Laurence Dunbar alluded to. Oh, give me a second. Like so many other black folks who made the transition from slavery to freedom, but who were still compelled by economic circumstances to spend most of their time living with and working for whites, Jacobs longed to give her children sustained emotional care and was not always able to give them the love she knew they needed and deserved. From slavery until the present day, black folks have felt conflicting tensions between survival needs and the demands of the heart. No doubt this is the part with why historian Leon Litwick titled his book about the lives of Southern black people in the age of Jim Crow, Trouble in Mind. Survival in a racist society often dictated that black people adjust to values and social mores imposed on us by the white world, which often affected our capacity to be loving. Chronicles of life after slavery and on into the mid-1900s show that black children were often given mixed messages by parents. They would be told by parents to respect themselves and other people, to cultivate good manners, to tell the truth, only to then be compelled by these same elders to act in a different way when encountering the white power structure. Litwick's book is full of testimony about the confusion black children faced as they tried to live within a world that had two codes of behavior. Many Southern black people living today remember being harshly and unjustly disciplined by parents who feared for our safety. In many black families, parents often thought that they needed to break the spirit of a willful, creative child in order to prepare them for living in the world of racial apartheid. The brilliant writer Zora Neale Hurston grew up in a family where her mother and father disagreed about how the children should be raised. Her father feared that she would pay a price for her rebellious nature. She remembered him saying, "The white folks were not going to stand for it. I was going to be hung before I got grown." Taught to accept subordination, black children naturally felt in a state of psychological conflict. On one hand, we had to possess enough self-esteem to self-educate, to seek education and self-advancement. Yet on the other hand, we had to know our place and stay in it. All too often, parents used harsh discipline and punishment to teach black children their proper place. Prior to the Civil Rights Movement, most parents felt it was a gesture of love to teach children skills that would enable them to survive in the existing culture of racial apartheid. At times, this meant teaching habits of being that teaching habits of being that were not rooted in love. To break someone's spirit is not a gesture of love. It can and often does lead to what contemporary psychoanalysis have called soul murder. Making it within a racist society often required and at times still requires both accommodation and assimilation. This often leads individual black people to develop a false sense, one rooted in pretense and the denial of genuine feelings. The poet Paul Laurence Dunbar alluded to this false self when he wrote that we wear the mask that grins and lies. All too often, though the false self black folks donned to make it in the public white-dominated world was not easily shed when they re-entered all black private settings, the reliance on lies, subterfuge, and manipulation used to get by in the world outside the home often became the standard of behavior in the home. Importantly, many of the survival strategies black people learned which enabled them to cope with life in a racist culture were not positive skills when applied to intimate interpersonal relationships. No lesson imprinted on the consciousness of most black people was as detrimental to black family life as the unequivocal belief that domination and subordination was a natural order, that the strong should rule over the weak, and that the more powerful should rule over the powerless by any means necessary. Such thinking justified domestic violence. Men who believed, as most of them did, that women were the weaker sex, put on this earth to serve and obey the stronger sex, often used physical assault to subordinate their female partners. In its chapter, Enduring, Leon Litwick documents that domestic violence was common. Much like their white counterparts, black males might lash out at women for no reason other than to exercise a male prerogative and to subdue independent spirits. Drawing on the life stories of well-known black figures such as Benjamin Mays, Zora Neale Hurston, and Louis Armstrong, who all witnessed their mothers and stepmothers being repeatedly beaten by the men in their lives, Litwick reports that there were many black couples who were able to sustain lasting marriages, but not without employing various strategies to balance the demands of labor and family. Concern with material survival often precluded a focus on love in black families. Care and affection were often reserved for the very young. Toni Morrison offers a fictional account of a dialogue between mother and daughter in her novel, Sula, that reveals how notions of love differed among generations. The second strange thing was Hannah's coming into her mother's room with an empty bowl and a peck of Kentucky Wonders and saying, "Mama, did you ever love us?" A silence follows these words. Then the dialogue continues. "I mean, did you? You know, when we were little?" The mother, Eva, responds initially by saying, "No, I don't reckon I did. Not the way you thinking." Enraged, Eva goes on, "You sitting here with your healthy ass self and ask me, did I love you?" Particularly annoyed by Hannah asking if she was ever playful with them, Eva proceeds to talk about struggling for survival. "No time. There wasn't no time. Not none. Soon as I got one day done, here come a night. With you all coughing and me watching so TB wouldn't take you off. And if you was sleeping quiet, I thought, oh Lord, they did, and put my hand over your mouth to feel if the breath was coming. What you talking about, did I love you, girl? I stayed alive for you. Can't you get that through your thick head?" Though fiction, the sentiments about love voiced in this passage echo the autobiographical comments Lorraine Hansberry made about her family when she described them as concerned only with material survival. Masses of black people suffered extreme material lack before the civil rights struggle altered the nature of the job market. I'll pause. Just so that you're aware, for those that you are listening, we are reading Salvation, Black People in Love, Bell Hooks, author of All About Love. We're on chapter 2, We Wear the Mask. I'll be reading straight through. We'll have a question and answer session later, but this is just for those who would like to listen and absorb this material, and then we'll pick up throughout the day on this session. So if you'd like to take notes, if you'd like to go back and listen to this reading on my YouTube, you certainly can. I'll post it as soon as I get the chance, and then we'll pick up. But this will be a week-long discussion. We'll be going through this book, so there'll be plenty of time. All right, thank you. Though fiction, the sentiments about love voiced in this passage echo the autobiographical comments Lorraine Hansberry made about her family when she described them as concerned only with material survival. Masses of black people suffered extreme material lack before the civil rights struggle altered the nature of the job market. It makes perfect sense that generations of black folks learned to see caring for someone's material well-being as a primary gesture of love. Growing up in the 50s, I remember hearing grown-ups talk about relationships in terms of whether or not a man provided for the woman and children in his life. Though our father was a stern, demanding, and punishing patriarch, when we were growing up, Mama always praised him for providing for us. I can remember having a conversation with her in the early 70s about the nature of love, like the fictional dialogue between Hannah and Eva Peace. A grown-up woman trying to understand this thing called love. I was taking a critical look at my relationship with my father. I told Mama I did not feel Daddy loved me. And she told me, of course he loves you. He's taken care of all your needs all these years. Tears overwhelmed my words as I tried to explain to her that love was more than meeting someone's material needs, that it was about respect, care, knowledge, and responsibility. I was a graduate student then, reading philosophy and studying psychology. I knew there was more to loving than caring for material needs. At the same time, I knew that working hard and sacrificing to meet material needs, to provide for one's family and kin, was a powerful gesture of care that could not be dismissed as having no value. Too many black children I knew did not have a father who worked hard and brought home the money that would be used not just for necessary food, but for special treats. Our father worked hard to provide for 7 children. Growing up as an only child with no father present, he had always had to work. His mother was stern and not very affectionate, yet they were deeply attached to each other. When she was dying, it was Mama who gave her tender loving care, washing her sick body, waiting on her hand and foot, and Daddy who provided. Providing really is not enough, even though it was crucial. Without a doubt, in black life, across classes, we tend to place too much importance on material well-being, neglecting our emotional development. In his memoir, Colored People, the famous black scholar Henry Louis Gates shares a revealing story about material longing. When he was growing up, his mother longed to buy a house. He recalls, Mama came to believe early on that the key to wealth and comfort in America was owning property. She wanted a nice house for the same reason she liked nice things. As in so many other places in the United States, white people made it difficult, if not downright impossible, for black folks to own property in Gates' hometown. When the 60s came, he and his father combined their financial resources and purchased the house owned by a white woman his mother had once worked for. Yet she was reluctant to move into the house. Explaining her reluctance, she stated, Mrs. Thomas used to make me sit out in the kitchen at a little wooden table and eat the scraps. She was a mean woman. She treated me bad. The thought of moving into this house, I wanted to burn this house down. Here is a case where the pain of remembered trauma could not be assuaged by a material gift, no matter how longed for. Yet when we read the autobiographies and biographies of African Americans, we often hear similar stories. Stories where material status is offered as a balm to wounded spirits. When we identify respect, coming from a root word meaning to look at, as one of the dimensions of love, then it becomes clear that looking at ourselves and others means seeing the depths of who we are. Looking into the depths, we often come face to face with emotional trauma and woundedness. Throughout our history, African Americans have poured energy into the struggle to achieve material well-being and status, in part to deny the impact of emotional woundedness. Truthfully, it is easier to acquire material comforts than to acquire love. When I interviewed the black rapper Ice Cube a few years ago and inquired how he coped with emotional pain, he responded by saying he stuffs down the pain. Repression often turns pain into rage. For black men of all ages, it is more acceptable to express rage than to give voice to emotional needs. Talking recently with the popular young female rapper Lil' Kim, I asked about love in her life, and she responded, "Love? What's that? I have not known any love. Abandoned by parents who physically abused her, she had no way to understand love, but she did understand material survival by any means necessary. Her attitudes about love were cynical. Her focus in life was on attaining more money and fame. Listening to her, I realized that it is easier for a talented individual to move from rags to riches in our society than it is for them to know love. We use the satisfaction of material longing to deny the need to love and be loved." Older black women entertainers, folks like Ella Baker and Etta James, reveal in their life stories how the search for love was often intermingled with the lust for fame and material luxury. It is no accident that the biography of Etta James is titled Rage to Survive. Emotionally abandoned by her mother at an early age, James found solace in her adopted kin. Dorothy, her mother, was a dashing, glamorous woman. James recalls, "I wanted to be a part of Dorothy's taste and style, but I wasn't. I couldn't count on her. She never had a word of praise. Praise wasn't a part of Dorothy's makeup. She looked on me like a nuisance. Yet every time she round, my little heart would start to flutter." Raised by her adopted kin, Mama Lou, Etta James was given love. Describing their relationship, she writes, "Mama Lou was strong in spirit but weak in body. She gave me all the loving encouragement I needed. She was my lifeline. She was the only adult who tried to understand me. She was one of the older ladies who could put herself in the place of a little girl. I felt her compassion." When this loving mother figure died while Etta was still a girl, she once again suffered the trauma of abandonment. Every black person knows individuals in the communities of their upbringing who were abandoned by biological mothers and fathers and raised by caring kin, usually by grandparents. Often caring kin do not give to their adopted children necessary emotional care, even though they provide shelter and meet material needs. Sustained loving care is needed to help heal the pain of emotional abandonment. Throughout our history in this nation, black people have tried to deny this pain, to act as though it does not affect our capacity to trust. Without trust, there can be no genuine intimacy and love. Yet for those among us who have been abandoned, it is difficult, if not impossible, to trust. To move toward love, we must confront the pain and abandonment and loss. This means speaking what may have once been unspeakable. So many black folks are grateful to the families and kin who raised them that it is difficult to be in any way critical of these environments. We know so well that often folks did the best that they could. We know so well that often folks did the best they could do given difficult and often harsh circumstances. However, to regain emotional well-being, we have to be able to see the bad that emerged in these settings as well as the good. As long as black folks normalize loss and abandonment, acting as though it is an easy feat to overcome the psychological wounds this pain inflicts, we will not lay the necessary groundwork for emotional well-being that makes love possible. I just read to you We Wear the Mask, Chapter 2 of Salvation, Black People in Love, a book by Bell Hooks. We'll be doing a live to discuss some of those topics at a later time. This will be hosted on my YouTube. I thank you all for listening this morning, and I wish you a very great day. You all be safe now.